All right, good afternoon. This is a meeting of the House Motor Vehicles Committee. I'm Tom Rice, the chairman, and this is our first meeting of the year. Before we go any further, I'd just like all the committee members to recognize the fact that in their folder, in your folder, you get a confidentiality form that we'd like you to sign, fill out and sign. If you could do that for us, and we'll collect that later on. In the meantime, Representative Battle, our secretary, would you return thanks for the graciousness of having a meeting today.
Our Father, we thank you for this day you have given to us and the privilege of service. Do not take it lightly, because we know that we are not only representing the districts that we might serve in, but all of Georgia. And I pray that as we do business today, that all that we do might be an opportunity.
Amen. Thank you. We're going to take up first. We're going to try and manage this because I know everybody's got some sort of a time constraint that wants to testify in here today. What we're going to do is to take up a couple of bills where I know that some of the sponsors have someplace they've got to be for another meeting that's going on right now. So the first bill we're going to take up is from Representative Battles. That would be House Bill 215, should be the first one in your folder. And Ms. Battles, you can either do that from your seat or you can stand up there or wherever you want to go. That's, you know, we are very highly lenient in this committee about this. What's your number down there, Ms. 12? Okay.
Give me the option of sitting or standing. I'm going to sit every time, probably. Right. But thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee. Today we bring House Bill 215, which in some cases we've heard the statement, this is just a little minor bill. Actually, this is not a minor bill. This is a major bill because it deals with issue that, as of today, has not been dealt with, and we hope that this will correct that. To give you a little background before I share the bill itself, is my wife was in education for a number of years. She's retired, and one of the things that she enjoyed most was during her educational experience was chartering a bus from, actually the owner of the company is here today, and they would be able to for a week go around the state of Georgia, and what they called, it was the Georgia tour, and they would go to various historical places in Georgia. And with this was the bus, but also it had a driver, and that driver was with those students 24/7 from the time they left home or left the school till they returned. And the question was, are they qualified? Now, of course, qualification is do they have a CDL license? Are they qualified to drive a commercial bus? All those had been answered, but there was one question that had not been answered, and that is whether or not that they had been found guilty of a sex offense. As you know, those are registered sex offenders, and as we went through this process and started looking at it, on the side of commercial bus companies, they're not required to determine whether or not that driver is in fact a sex offender. So that means that the students, and these were middle school children, would be on a bus for a long period of time and not sure whether or not they were really exposed to someone that had been found guilty of the offense of molesting children or other sex violations. So what this bill does, House Bill 215, it simply, in the description of that, and this substitute, and it is substitute LC 295079S. This would, in fact, require that all commercial drivers with a CDL license, there would be an indication in their background check. And receiving a CDL license would be determined whether or not that they had been found guilty of some type of sex crime, and it would be indicated on those on their license. That would be presented to the bus company, and they in turn would say, well, this does not qualify you to work for us, and then of course that would protect them from exposing them to children and others that might be could be violated. It's only the CDL license holders who drive buses carrying passengers and children, and some examples of that I've just mentioned. Other examples, and we have someone from the Department of Education that can testify to this, and that is that many times the school systems themselves, for football games, basketball games, they will lease a bus for transporting of young people to a game or to some type of activity. And what this will do is this will allow the system and those bus companies to regulate those drivers who are transporting young people. That designation would be actually on the license itself, and this simply means that they could not operate a commercial vehicle carrying passengers in the vehicle of 16 or more, or a school bus. It will affect license holders obtaining license after July the 1st, 2012, and also, because this would go through the Department of Motor Vehicles, that anyone who had violated or had been found guilty of a sex offense, at the time of renewal, that would be exposed, and that CDL license would then indicate that offense. Now, that does not keep them from driving the 18-wheelers and those types of vehicles, but it will keep them from applying and being employed by a commercial company that does business with schools and also operates a bus that would transport children. There's a couple of things that is in this that I think you should know, and those who have have a copy of this, there is a physical note, and I want to say that, and Mr. Chair, I've said this to you. There's any number of fingerprints on this bill, and if we were to identify how many fingerprints and could trace those back, our chairman probably has worked on this as much as far more than I have, and I do thank him for that, and of course John Keys, who is here representing the bus companies. There is a physical note, and it is attached to this bill. That does, in fact, bring some question of implementation, but I believe that we can work through this. The main thing of this bill is to protect children from the possibility of being exposed to those who have been found guilty of a sex crime. And Mr. Chair, I would like for John Keys to speak to this, if it would be.
Well, why don't we ask the committee members if they have any questions of you to start with?
Okay.
Are there questions of the author? Terry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair.
Representative Johnson.
Representative Battle, I wanted to ask you this question, and
Yes, sir.
it's really dealing with some of our 501c3s and churches that have buses that drivers require the CDLs. At our church, through me personally, we have difficulty finding drivers. Basically, additional fees, I've asked about that, and I say I think not. But if there are, it would be imposed on the institution because we certainly pay the applicant to get the license.
Well, thank you. That's a good question, and there's not, because you remember it is the applicant that is paying to receive the license, and so no, that would not be passed on to the.
Quick question.
Yes, Representative Johnson.
Based on that, my question basically remains the same, because certainly we reimburse for this license at a church, and I think most of them do, and you've got a volunteer that's willing to do it. Do you think there's going to be an additional fee for this?
That has not been determined, and I don't believe there will be. As you know, there's a database of this information that is out there. And anyone who is applying for a CDL license will go through that process that we all do, and that is application. And in this particular case, because it has been attached to that person, where they're not, it's a sex offense, that indication will be there, and whether in the first time or in a renewal, that will be there, and that cost will be passed on to that to the person that is applying for it.
Any other questions for the author? Okay, Mr. Keys, why don't you come up and provide us some testimony here. Tell us who you are and who you represent. Wait a second. Get up to the microphone before you do that, please.
Good afternoon. I'm John Keys. I'm with the Georgia Motor Coach Operators Association. Thank you for this opportunity. I think Representative Battles explained why we are interested in this. My association that I'm representing. A number of states have had issues. We're trying to be on the front end, be proactive on an issue that we don't ever want to happen here in this state. We've researched a number of other states, some public transit systems, one in Oregon just late last year, 3 school systems in Virginia, Ohio, and New Hampshire, incidents involving sex offenders with school children. Not a pretty picture. And what we're trying to do is we are policing. I want you to know that. We are trying to police our industry, but not everybody's playing by the same rules. We have sent out most recently, just I guess a few weeks ago, how to use the Georgia Sex Offender Registry, how our operators, when they're employed and screening folks for employment, can use that registry, can screen alpha by last name, and that's how it works. It's about 20,000 names. Changes every day. It's updated every day. Our folks, the folks I'm representing, we have 3 different companies here today. They can answer direct questions on how operations work in their small business. But it's kind of tough to go through 20,000 names, and it unfortunately grows every day by alpha by last name and where they're located of folks on this registry. So what we do that. Our folks screen, but this would provide a second tier of defense, if you will, by having the State Department of Driver Safety revoke existing licenses under certain circumstances. The licenses are commercial driver license with a P, meaning passenger, or S, student endorsements. So only for those folks who are on the registry on or after, for acts committed on or after July 1 of 2012 will this be applicable. Then subsequent renewals, the trigger will be raised or pulled by the Department of Driver Safety as well. Our folks continue to try to screen as best we can as well. But again, this will be kind of a second tier of defense to try to weed out bad folks that we don't want around our kids. Again, we're trying to be proactive on this, and we've worked, and we very much appreciate working with Chairman Rice and Representative Battles over the legislative interim. Bill came over from the Senate last year, wasn't quite ready for prime time last year, but hopefully this will meet all objections. And we've tried to pattern it along the lines of North Carolina law, which three states now have laws similar to this. North Carolina and Alabama in 2010, and most recently the state of New York just passed a law last year. We have a 3-year sunset in it to evaluate how it's working, so that we can come back, y'all can review how it does work and improvements that can be made, or let it sunset in 3 years. There are affidavit processes required. I think we have the Department of Driver Safety's support, I hope, of the bill. The Department of Education, we've talked with the Motor Trucking Association folks. They are unaffected. That industry is unaffected. And school folks and transit systems, I believe, as well, are supported, the Georgia Transit Association. So hopefully you all can see fit to pass this bill, and we appreciate your help. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Keys? Questions from the committee? I'm glad you stated, Mr. Keys, that this bill does sunset in 3 years. I think the other thing is that there is not a fiscal note that I found in the folder attached to this, but there was one provided for us through the audits committee. It's gone through a fiscal note from the audits committee. You want to comment on that for the department or not, Mr. Hammond? You can stand there and do it. That's fine. And there is an appeal process provided for in the bill. Okay. All right. Any questions for the witness? Anybody else care to testify on this bill? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. You come on up. You tell us who you are and who you represent, and we're glad to have you here today.
This down just a little bit here. My name is Brenda Tidwell, and I'm associated with Leisure Time Charters and Tours in Emerson, Georgia. I'm also on our city council in our city. I'm also a mother, and I'm also a grandmother. We're a family-owned bus company for 21 years, and we've done background checks for every one of those years. And every time we do a background check, I cross my fingers because I'm afraid something maybe slipped by somewhere, that person got in that door with that endorsement on that license. And even on that background check that we have the Sheriff's Department of the local city police do, we could miss something. We do background checks, but that doesn't mean every bus company out there does background checks. If you're a new bus company, probably wouldn't even think of it, because you don't have to do it. There's no DOT law saying you have to do it. If you're a small church and you're starting up, I'm not sure you do a background check on your drivers for your little buses that go around and pick up your kids in the neighborhood. And if you have to add $20 more a license, that's fine with me. If that keeps one child from being hurt, abused, anyway, anything happening to a child, I think that'd be just fine with me. We know so far, because there's some members that are not here today because they're at the largest bus show in the United States, in California today. We know that already Alabama, North Carolina, and New York have this in place. We know there are other states that are considering it already. And one of my biggest concerns, that Georgia line is not a brick wall. It's very easy to come across it. Very easy to come and apply for a license. Very easy to get one. Just pass the test, pass the written test, pass the driving test. So I'm going to, and also when we're talking about money on it, I don't think money can be a big factor in this. I think children have to be a big factor in this. I think making sure that none of them are hurt or injured in any way. As I've heard people say, this is a minor bill. To me, this is not a minor bill. This is a major bill. This is a bill the state of Georgia should have already had in place to protect our children. I want to see this passed very badly. Even if we can't, looking for CDL drivers is always hard. It's a field that you can use more and more people in all the time. I'd rather lose 5 or 15 buses than I had have somebody hurt. I think this bill needs to be passed, and that's the grandmother in me talking. The grandmother who knows when she goes to get on the bus for the church that that driver has been screened not only by the company that hired him, but by the state. And that's the way I feel about it.
Okay. Okay, there's somebody, well, thank you so much for coming up and sharing that with us. We appreciate it. Somebody else who would like to testify today? All right, if you'll just, I know this is Department of Education representation. If you'll just tell us your name and obviously Department of Education.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tom Wilson, Director of Governmental Affairs for the Georgia Department of Education, and we're here to speak in support of this bill. As you know, a local school district, every employee, every bus driver, every custodian, in many districts, volunteer parents are screened, background checked. And invariably what happens in districts, particularly with band trips, with playoff games where you're traveling long distance across the state, a school district can't send local buses, because if you're sending 7 or 8 buses to play a ball game or a band trip to Savannah, you don't have enough buses in your district to bring kids home in the afternoon, particularly if they got to leave, middle of the day or some early in the morning. So you end up chartering buses. And so we certainly support this to ensure that those drivers that are transporting those kids on those commercial vehicles are background checked. And I was a superintendent and a high school principal for a long time, and quite honestly, I may have made the false assumption those drivers were background checked, but I was quite shocked to find out they weren't when Representative Battles talked to me about this. So we just feel like it's another step to ensure safety of kids, and we would appreciate your support of that.
Okay. Any questions for the witness? No question? Is it the late hour here, guys? You guys, gentlemen, are generally much more aggressive on these things, but that's fine. Yeah, no. Well, let's. Yeah. Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to testify on this today at all? Right. For members of the committee, let me provide a little perspective on this bill too. The bill came over from the Senate last year, and the bill, as Mr. Keyes said, was not shaped up and ready to go. It was a kind of a over-the-top type of a over-regulatory type of situation. We did work on this over the course of the summer. Mr. Keyes is probably one of the most persistent people I've ever met in my life. I guess that's to his advantage. And he and I worked on it, but Ms. Travis, Jill Travis, the Legislative Council's organization, Terry, one of your friends and co-workers who has been involved in this from the start, spent an immense amount of time on this bill. For members of the committee, this is about the 7th iteration of changes on this bill. This has been checked with the GBI. It's been checked with the Department of Driver Services in terms of what the P&S endorsements require and who's applicable for them. And therefore, this is probably a bill that's been vetted fairly consistently. And with that, Mr. Powell would have a question.
I have a question. But
I'd like comment, discussion. Well, then I'll recognize you for a motion, Mr. Powell.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to move this committee adopt substitute HB 215.
Is there a second? Second? Second. All right. Mr. Harden seconds it. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Obviously not. Okay. All right, Mr. Keyes, you got your bill. Mr. Balley, you've got your bill too, and that's great. You're off to the Rules Committee. All righty. Hold on. Yours. Where's? No. Yeah. I got that. I'm looking for. I think it's a substitute. Let's see. Chuck, what's your bill number? I don't have 84. Do you have it in there? Well, for some reason. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we're gonna call House Bill 884, and the caption on the bill deals with drive-out tags for trailers. And our friend Chairman Sims is here and ready to hold forth on this bill. If you would care to update us on what this does, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you House Bill 884, and I'll tell you a little bit of background behind the bill. I have several cargo trailer companies in my area, and some of them have dealers that are specifically designed or specifically to sell their type of cargo trailer, and then there are others that are just independent. And what's going on is that if they want to take a demonstrator model out just behind a pickup truck or a personal vehicle, they don't have a dealer tag. They'll be pulled over, and they don't have a dealer tag. And the manufacturer does this fairly often with the just a demonstrator model to an event or some kind of show or whatever. And what they're asking for is all the manufacturers even ask for this, to have the ability to get these drive-out tags basically for specifically. They don't need a lot of them. They just need onesie twosies basically, so that they can take these demonstrator models to a show or to a sale or an event, and so that they may sell it there, they may not. If they do, then they're, of course the buyer then has to buy a regular trailer tag for the trailer, as it would by law. It doesn't change any of that. It's just that these folks just need something so they can carry it up and down the road. What's happening now, they're having to load these up with a big truck, one trailer with a big truck, carry it to a show, and then carry it back. It's just costing them a lot of money to do that if they don't have it. Now, if you have a dealer, some of those manufacturers are going to the dealer themselves, asking the dealer to carry it, and they have a dealer drive-out tag. So it puts a kind of a burden on that manufacturer, because they're the ones carrying it, and they're using somebody else's dealer tag, and they feel a little bit, in the aspect of it being legal, they don't really know if it is or not. So they just asked that they could get these dealer tags so they could carry the demonstrator models out. That's all this bill does.
Thank you, Chairman. Does anybody care to comment or question? Questions? Who is? A question. I have a question. The department Department of Revenue is in agreement with this, Chairman?
I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it affects Department of Revenue at all on the dealer tag. To the fact that except they're just going to be able to buy them. That's all.
Okay. Where's Miss Lambert? Where are you all back there? Mr. Hooper, Miss Lambert, would you care to comment on this at all? Okay, why don't you come up and tell us, Chairman Sims? Why don't you let Miss Lambert from the department come up and comment, and we'll see if we can't get this thing done. Yeah, you can sit down. Sure, right. That's fine. Dealer tags have been the source for the audience, the source of a lot of concern over the years in terms of the way they're used. I expressed that comment out in the hallway to somebody that said, I wonder about the person I saw at 7 o'clock at night, pulling into their driveway with a dealer tag on. I'm beginning to wonder as to whether or not how these things are used on a personal basis, but that's fine. Anyway, we'll address that at a different time.
Right.
Go ahead.
Good
Ms.
afternoon.
Lambert.
I'm Vicki Lambert, Director of Motor Vehicle Division and Local Government Services. This is Doug Hooper, who has much more institutional knowledge. And
Welcome back, Doug.
Ask him to. concern that we may have with just the way it's worded.
Yeah. To be honest with you, the explanation you provided doesn't seem to agree with the language here. The language here appears to have a temporary license plate issued to the purchaser of the vehicle, not necessarily to the transport or the display or demonstration of a trailer. And
Line 60, I think is what it is.
it begins there where it starts out. It says authorized issue to the purchaser at the time of sale. And there is a code section for dealers. I'm going to test my memory here, but I think it's 40-2-38 or 40-2-39, which would address a dealer to use a dealer license plate for transporting a vehicle. Yeah.
These are manufacturers.
And manufacturers and distributors and those cases.
Oh. Well, hold on. Let's just. Okay. Can we? Is there a fix for this, or is there something in the code already that you're telling me that addresses this issue of the manufacturer having a dealer tag?
I'm reluctant to say that the fix is in the code already, but I think with a small tweak and a few minutes to look at the code section, we can find something that will fit.
Okay. Why don't we suspend consideration? Why don't you, Chairman and Vicki and Doug, just kind of go outside the door for a few minutes and see if you can fix this thing, bring it back in, and we'll move ahead. Okay. So we're going to suspend discussion on 884. You want to? Yeah. And Terry, if you join them, I'd really appreciate it. All right. We're gonna have a little senatorial courtesy here and have Mr. Senator Tippins come up and explain his bill. Senator, we would like to make sure that whatever committees you serve on and the leadership of the Senate should know that we're taking you ahead of a couple of other majorly important bills from the House of Representatives here. So, and that is not true, but that's a first mistake.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just say of those committees that I chair, that's a practice since I don't chair. That make for a problem.
I want to know what committees that was that you chaired.
I wanted to be real up front with you. Mr. Chairman, committee members, I appreciate your kindness. I bring to you today Senate Bill 138. This is a holdover bill from last year. I'm sure that you can read silently quicker than I can read orally, so I'm going to outline the provisions of this bill. This bill has two parts. The original bill, which is now Section 2, I was asked to bring by the local sheriff in Cobb County. This relates to an individual who may be stopped for the offense of driving without a license. As law is currently applied, that individual can go to a driver's license office and get a driver's license, and if they present that new license that they've got after the offense, they can be relieved from the obligation or the charge of being driving without a license. This Section 2 clarifies that and says a valid driver's license had to be held at the time of the offense, or if it was suspended, it would have had to have been reissued or made valid between the time of the offense and the court date. This basically closes the loophole that you could go get a new license but between the time of the offense and the court date. The second part of this, which was actually Section 1, which is Section 1, I was asked subsequently to the submittal of the original bill if they could use this bill as a vehicle to also apply a requirement to the obtaining of a tag renewal. An individual had to basically show proof of identification either by a valid driver's license or a state-issued identification card. I know last year there was some pushback from the tag agents in the local tax commissioner's office on this part. If this is overly onerous to them, it would not upset me if y'all want to do a substitute and just delete Section 1. Section 2 is really the portion about the driver's license itself. that I was really interested in originally.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Senator. Any questions from the committee for Senator Tippins? All right. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Senator. Just wanted to ask for information. Did we not hear this bill last year already?
You did hear it in committee, and I think it stayed in committee last year.
It did.
Any action on it that time?
It was passed with a committee substitute on March 31st of last year. And this is the committee substitute that we passed last year is different. This is the unpassed Senate version.
I agree. I agree. Right.
Yes, we did have this, and we passed it out last year.
So the status of the bill was it was recommitted back based on the rules. The committee did not hear it.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. That was my mistake in terms of the status of the bill. Well, it was obviously recommitted back for good reason, and so we're going to take some action on this. And I recognize Mr. Powell.
Proper time, I'd like to be recognized for that.
Representative Powell, you are recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to amend Senate Bill 138 and strike from line 10 through line 28 and renumber the sections accordingly.
Is there a second? Discussion? Okay, second from Representative Johnson. Any discussion on the change? Senator, you're okay with that change on the virtue of your testimony?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so we have an amendment made and seconded. All in favor of the amendment as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, none. Okay, for the purposes, Gary, for your purposes, we just amended Senate Bill 138 to take out basically Section 1. But the motion was to amend it from line 17 through line...
Excuse me. Strike line from line 10 to line 28 and renumber accordingly.
That's the entire Section 1, and it was made and passed. All right. So, Senator Tippins, with that, then the question is on the bill itself. Do I hear a motion on the bill?
So moved.
As amended? All right. So the motion is to approve Senate Bill 138 as amended. Motion's been made. Is there a second? Michael. Okay. All in favor? All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay. All right. Does anybody is there any unanimous consent to the request by Legislative Council?
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, we're good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, thank you for coming today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
All right. Next meeting. Okay. That's fine. So we'll suspend consideration on House Bill 169. All right. Till next time. Okay. You'll notice that we are a little thinner in terms of our committee at this point in time, and the reason we're a little thinner is because Mr. Austin, Representative Austin, chose to run for Congress, and one of our other members, your good friend Tim, has been appointed to a new position by the governor. So our erstwhile membership is down to some extent here, but we'll rebuild that as we go.
So what we'll make up from quantity, we'll certainly make up by quality, Mr. Chairman.
Definitely. I can only agree with that. All right. Well, it's good that this is not on the internet today, so I really appreciate that that's the case. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. We're gonna move to consideration of some tag bills, but here's the way we plan to do this. Always, what we've done is to substitute one bill when we got all the tag bills together. Anything that has to do with tags, in terms of changes, provisions, or new tags are generally considered in one substitute bill, assuming that we have agreement on the content, and that the provisions of the current law have already been applied, particularly in the case of those shared revenue tags that we find in our in-basket year after year. So we're going to do that next week. We're going to reschedule a meeting on the entire tag bill substitute for next week. However, we do want to take testimony from anybody here who has an interest in any of these tag bills, and I think probably the best way to do that, I don't think we have any of those bills. I don't have any of those bills sitting in my folder. Well, Mr. McBrayer, what's your bill number? 732. Let's just call Bill 732 from a discussion standpoint as a hearing, and you can just present that very quickly, and then we'll hear any testimony from the good people out there on any of the tag bills, whether it's the firefighters bill or any of the other tag bills. We'll just take your testimony today, so you don't have to come back next week. Generally, these bills process through without a great deal of controversy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
You're
So
recognized.
you do not have a copy of the bill right now, is that correct?
I don't. I think
Okay.
the other members of the committee do.
Have a substitute. Okay.
So I'm sorry, substitute
On the
732.
substitute, if you look under section 2 on page 2, and this will be just my original bill, but it was brought to my attention by a constituent this past summer under section A there that motor vehicle or motorcycle owners who are veterans of the armed forces of the United States who have been awarded the Purple Heart citation shall be able to receive a special and distinctive vehicle license plate. But this particular guy was still an active member of the military, and he had been awarded the Purple Heart citation. In North Carolina at Fort Bragg, in that state, he was able to have a license plate for his car with the Purple Heart. But once he moved to Fort Benning in Georgia, he tried to get the tag transferred and found out that Georgia does not allow active members of the military to have the license plate. So on page 3, we just amended that. For the purpose of this code section, the term veteran shall include a member of the armed forces or reserves who is still serving on active duty after being awarded the Purple Heart citation. I mean, it's just the least we can do, you know, for our one that had taken one for the team, you know, wounded, and so I just would ask for your consideration of this
Okay.
change.
Well, Representative McBrayer, you're going to get the opportunity to hopefully explain that on the floor, along with all the rest of the tag bills that happen to be
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be
sitting
honored
in
to do
here.
so.
You're gonna get that, and I, you know, we ought to tell Mr. McBrayer, I think that he's picked an incredibly good bill for his first bill to be presented. I'm sure that you'll get that opportunity to do that if the rules chairman agrees,
Yes, sir.
and we move it up the line. Okay, thank you for presenting that. Who else wants to talk on any portion of the tag bills here today? Mr. Allison, you want to comment? Or you have somebody here to comment on them? Representative Allison. We got to cut a hole in that bar there so that people don't have to walk down there and around. That's an encumbrance.
It comes with the territory, Mr. Chairman. My bill number is 724. On your substitute, I believe it's the very last paragraph, if I'm not mistaken, the very last section of this bill. This is the firefighters tag, and I have a couple people who would like to testify about it. The brunt of this legislation is very simple. A couple of years ago, when we passed House Bill 1055, we got caught up charging our certified firefighters for their tags. As you'll hear in testimony later, many of those firefighters need those tags to access the scene of a fire. And so all this bill does is go back to where we were before, that basically would exempt them from paying the license plate fee for those special renewal tags. So that's what this bill does. I'm happy to let Mr. McBrayer carry it on the floor, but I do have Chief Gibbs of the Marietta Fire Department, who is going to speak on behalf of Georgia firefighters and I believe on behalf of the Fire Chiefs Association.
Okay.
That's
Thank you, Representative Allison. Appreciate the presentation and the conciseness of it. Chief, thank you so much for coming down today. We appreciate it, and you'll just tell us about firefighters for a moment. I think you're going to be in pretty good shape here.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to talk briefly with you. That's what this does. It just relieves, when they go to get their tag renewed, They were being charged the $35 fee just to keep their sticker on this. Many of our volunteers use this. Volunteer departments use it to identify who should and who should not be on the scene. So it's very important to them. And the overwhelming majority of firefighters in the state of Georgia are our citizens who volunteer their time and effort to protect the community. There are career firefighters who use the tag as well, and we think it's just a good thing for them. This is not your run-of-the-mill vanity tag. This is something that's very important to them and their profession and their volunteering. So we appreciate your favorable consideration.
Okay. Any questions for any of the witnesses we've had on this? Okay. We really do appreciate you coming down here. Is there anybody else who'd like to testify on any of the substitute to HB 732? Again, this is a hearing purposes. Okay, I'm sorry. Man, I am really off today. All right. No, we won't do that right now. That's fine, Christian. Okay, anybody else? All right. Well, look, thank you to all who have testified on this today. We are going to suspend on this on 732. There are a couple more bills that are out there, and we're going to include them in the substitute, and then we'll bring the substitute next week to the meeting. Okay. All righty. Did you have a question? I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson. You need to push a button. There you go. All right.
Chairman, I'm not asking for myself. I'm really asking for others, but this does not impact legislative tax cost of benefit.
Well, Ms. Johnson, that's a good news, bad news story. The legislative tag is really not encumbered by this, except by the extra $30 charge that we'll put on top of the current charge to pay for the reductions in the tags that we're just considering in 732. How's that sound? I'm sure you'd love that. Okay, that's a lie too. So that's supposed to be a little levity here, but I guess we're past that point in time. All right. Okay. All right. Let's move ahead. All righty. We've got 2 bills left. Let's see. 865. I guess is probably
65.
You want to do 865? We're going to call 865, which is the Georgia Motor Common and Contract Carry Act 2012. Mr. Powell's recognized to talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, while this bill looks to be pretty thick, it's 42 pages. It's really quite simple. This has been asked for by the Department of Public Safety, the Public Service Commission, i.e. through the governor's office. Back several years ago, the Public Service Commission used to regulate some of the carriers, limos, the trucks that do household good moving, some of the buses, limos, and those type of folks. And of course, things have gone back and forth in the history. We had a DMVS at one time, and some of this stuff stayed up at PSC. Some of it went back. Some of it's gone over to DPS. Eventually, what has happened, Public Service Commission has been neutered over the years by virtue of having no enforcement personnel. They used to have the what has evolved into the motor carrier division right now under the Department of Public Safety. So they have no enforcement personnel per se to physically enforce. What this bill does, it unplugs all of those code sections that dealt with the Public Service Commission and moves that enforcement over to the Department of Public Safety. In the budget, that money is already prepped to already be moved, the few hundred thousands of dollars. Now, in the process of doing this bill, it just seems that there was some idiosyncrasies that just absolutely needed to be dealt with. So it's easier for me to go over the changes that was made, what I consider minor substantive changes, and I will do that at this time. On page 3, lines 61 to 68, there was no real penalty for failure to register these carriers. There was a fine in place, but it was basically a loophole, so we tightened up that language so that a failure to register could draw a specific fine and to be enforceable.
We also cleaned up some of the definitions. There were multiple definitions of motor carriers, other contract carriers, common carriers, and such. We cleaned up this language. On pages 11, we codified the fees that are being charged currently over at the Public Service Commission. We codified these fees under Georgia law, so they're very specific and spelled out. On page 19, we have required let's see, the household movers. These were the trucks. I'm not sure if their legislative person is here. Gosh knows he ought to be, because he likes to he's done so much work on this bill, but he'd come to us, and because of a lot of the problems that exist right now with these carriers that move people's household belongings, they had asked, would we require that the license number be included on advertising, which we did not think that was a bad thing, because they've got folks all over the state that aren't licensed. They're holding themselves out as house movers, and we thought that maybe that would be a good thing. Simple, wouldn't cost the state anything, so that these folks, when they're doing advertising, so when you see Julio in the paper, 2 Julios in a truck are going to move you around, and they got to put their license in there. If not, we could figure out who they are, quite frankly. And then last but not least, chauffeurs. The way this law had been handled and the way the process had been handled was sort of antiquated in our view, that if you were a chauffeur in Georgia and you had a driver's license, your quote driver's license, to be a chauffeur you had to trot down to the Department of Driver Services to get another license that basically said that you were a chauffeur. So why would you need 2 cards in your wallet? Why not just simplify the process, take the driver's license, and if you're going to be a chauffeur, have an attachment on your driver's license. Worked with Mr. Hammond and DDS. That's the language they put forth. Doesn't cost anything. It makes it a whole lot more efficient. And that
change is found on page 25. Okay.
And that, gentleman of the committee and Mr. Chairman, is basically what this bill does. I do see the chairman of the PSC and Mr. Bill Edge, they want it out of their court so bad that they're over here, and I believe the chairman and Bubba McDonald could even get along on this one if we get it out from under their out of their department.
Okay. Questions to the author? Okay. Just for the enlightenment of the committee, the reason this bill is so long, of 41 pages, is simply because of the transfer of responsibility.
That's
from,
exactly right. You're
PSC.
Unplugging.
Okay. Everybody got it? All right. Any questions? It's very long, but it's very straightforward. Anybody else care to testify on this bill? All righty. Isn't it wonderful how to have the PSC represented here today? This is great.
Well, my name's Chuck Eaton, and I'm the vice chairman of the PSC. But I'll be very brief. Representative Powell covered most of what I was going to say, but Commission fully supports the bill and has worked very closely with the Department of Public Safety in crafting the legislation. The governor also supports it. As Representative Powell mentioned before, when we originally had transportation, we had our own police force. That got moved over to the Department of Motor Vehicle Safety. When it came back to us, they gave us everything but the police force, so we were a toothless agency, and had a whole lot of authority but no way of enforcing it. By recombining this is going to improve the regulation of the household carriers, buses, limousines, and the tow trucks. Probably the main thing driving it is the illegal movers. These days you can get a used rider truck and a cell phone and you're in the business, and they're competing against folks that are playing by the rules and paying for their insurance and everything else. So we wholeheartedly support this and appreciate Representative Powell introducing
Great. Chuck, this is a leveling of the playing field, basically, in terms of that
exactly.
issue, and a reassurance to the Georgians that that everything's being done on the as close to the up and up as we can possibly make it by law.
Yeah.
Thank you for your work and your help on this. Thanks for coming down today, Chuck. We
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate
Chairman.
it. All right, take care. Anybody else want to testify on this bill? Okay. We well, we're at that time. Is there any discussion on? You have a question, Ms. Johnson? Recognize Mr. Johnson for a motion. Move to pass. There's second. All right, moving second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign, no. Okay, good. Moved on. 865 passes, and you're in good shape. All right, we've got House Bill 795. Mr. Powell, you are back on again
Real
today.
quick, Bill, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Chairman. This bill basically modifies the definitions and upgrades the definitions of all-terrain vehicles, recreational off-highway vehicles. Basically, it sets up a class of non-highway, changes the low-pressure tires to non-highway tires as a definition. Basically says that 50 inches or less in width. On Class 1, it sets up a class standard. Class 1 would be 1,200 pounds with non-highway tires. Class 2 goes up to 2,000 pounds, and it's 65 inches in width. And quite frankly, if you ask me what this bill is for to upgrade the code section, you know, I sit here and I scratch my head, but this comes to you from some manufacturers. And I think it's because while they do they manufacture these different type of off-road recreation, they're in the Georgia code and they're in there for a purpose, and they needed them to be recognized because they're a manufacturer. And I see their paid gun over there. If you'd like to address that question.
Okay. Are there any questions before you come up, Rusty? Are there any questions for the author of the committee? Seeing none, Rusty, why don't you come on up and tell us a little bit more about this?
The author, in his own inimitable style, pretty well summarizes it. The chairman will recall that we did this about 5 years ago with this very same thing when the manufacturers came out with a new line called, you will know them as the Polaris Ranger, the John Deere Gator. Right. We updated the statutes at that point. We're just catching the statutes up with the state of manufacturing. There's new vehicles that are being introduced, and this simply just acknowledges that these vehicles are now on the market and includes them into the code. So we're just simply catching up state law with the state of manufacture in this industry.
Okay.
So.
Any questions?
I like that way you said that. I remember that.
Okay, I think this is a rather straightforward bill. Thank you for your testimony, Rusty. Thank you for coming down here today. Are there any further discussion on the bill? There a motion? Second? Second. All right. Any other discussion? All in favor of passage of House Bill 795 by saying yes?
Yay.
Yay. No. Light sign. We're good. Okay. Passed. And yeah. I'm sorry? Yeah, he's
Holding action on that bill.
Okay. All right. So, is there any additional comments or questions or discussion to be brought before the committee today for the good of the committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.